Mr. Bugliosi, I have to tell you, sir, I said when I saw the book and I began to read it, I told a friend of mine that it was audacious. That's the only word that I could come up with, and I have to congratulate you. A phenomenal job in what I've read so far, comprehensive, and boy, I got to tell you, it took some guts to do it the way you did it, and I congratulate you for that.
Well, I appreciate that, Jeff. What we might tell the listeners that the title of the book is called Reclaiming History, the Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Jeff, I really find it difficult to speak candidly about this book without sounding boastful, but the alternative is even worse, because if I don't sound boastful, someone could think that this is just another book on the assassination, and it's not. I've had 3 #1 New York Times best-selling books, and I've never talked about them the way I've talked about this book. The LA Times said that finally someone has put all the pieces together. Reclaiming History is a book for the ages. The Wall Street Journal said that it's unlike any book ever written on the assassination. I worked on it for close to 21 years. As you know, you were talking about the length, 1.5 million words. It's the equivalent of about 13 volumes, which we shoehorned into one volume of 1,600 pages. And then there's a CD, as you know, Jeff, attached to the end of it, which is another 1,125 pages. This is essentially a very simple case. Within hours of the shooting in Dealey Plaza, virtually all of local Dallas law enforcement knew that Oswald had killed Kennedy, and when they found out what a kooky was, they concluded that he had acted alone. But this simple case has been transformed by the conspiracy theorists and thousands of Warren Commission critics into its present form. And its present form, Jeff, it's the most complex murder case by far in world history. Just to give you an example, in manuscript form, one of my endnotes, I'm not talking about the main text, one of my endnotes on acoustics alone is 120 pages with about 60 footnotes. But at its core, this is a simple case.
Well, and you said something that I want to have you talk about at length again here. Vincent Bugliosi is with us. He is the author of the new book, the recently released book, I should say, Reclaiming History, the John F. Kennedy Assassination. You said if you didn't boast, you would be forced to wallow in the muck of the seemingly thousands of books that have been written about the assassination that have zero credibility, zero fact, but continue somehow to dominate people's fascination. And what you've done is not just write a definitive account of the assassination, but you also did something else that I thought was very gutsy, and that is very aggressively have debunked all previous efforts to weave conspiracy into the assassination.
Yeah, this really is the first book. Well, number one, it's the first book to ever cover the entire case. No other book has ever attempted to do that. But with respect to what you were talking about, Jeff, it's the first book, surprisingly, that has taken on all of these conspiracy theorists and destroyed every one of their theories. My editor in New York, Starling Lawrence, said it took a book of this magnitude to finally put a stake in the heart of the conspiracy movement in this country. But it's going to be difficult to do, Jeff, because the American people have been bombarded with one conspiracy book after another, one TV show, radio show, lecture, college lecture. Oliver Stone, his movie was one continuous lie. He did have a couple things correct. He had the date correct, the location, the victim. Otherwise, it was one continuous lie. And these people have succeeded to the point where now 75% of the American people believe in a conspiracy, and only 19%, Jeff, accept the findings of the Warren Commission.
It reminded me of something that I want to bring to you now. I want to remind everybody here, 812 on Stimulating Talk 570 KLIF. Vincent Bugliosi is with us this morning. He is the author of Reclaiming History, the John F. Kennedy Assassination. It reminds me of what I heard, and I know that you can address this as an accomplished attorney in 2 different ways, but it reminds me very much of the aftermath of the O.J. Simpson murders, when you would have had to have had a vast number of people in a room agreeing on the same story. You couldn't have not kept it secret in a million years, and yet many of these conspiracy theories that you debunk with great accuracy are built around the same idea that literally thousands of people would have had to have been in the same place at the same time agreeing on the same story in the immediate aftermath of this. And furthermore, your experiences arguing as an accomplished attorney in the trial of Lee Harvey Oswald, which I'd like to have you tell people about. You do that in the book. Further signify to me that by debunking all of this, you've given people irrefutable evidence.
Yes, Jeff. The trial was in 1986 in London. Jerry Spence defended Oswald. We had a regular federal jury chosen from the jury rolls of the Dallas Federal District Court, a regular federal judge from Midland, the original Warren Commission witnesses, no script. And Spence and I went at it for 21 hours in London. We worked on the case for over 5 months, and he'll tell you the same thing as I. We handled it like a regular murder case. And on this, by the way, the Dallas jury came back with a verdict of guilty against Oswald. On this issue of conspiracy, Jeff, I told the jury over there, I said, 3 people can keep a secret, but only if 2 are dead. And here it's close to 44 years later, and not one single word, not one credible syllable has come out that any of these groups, like the CIA, mob, military-industrial complex, was involved in any way in the assassination. Number 2, there's no evidence that Oswald was ever connected in any way with any of these groups believed to be behind the assassination. Number 3, assuming one of these groups, just for the sake of argument, decided to murder Kennedy, Oswald would have been one of the last people on the face of this earth, Jeff, they would have gone to. Number 1, he was not an expert shot. He was a good shot, but not an expert shot. He had a $12 mail-order rifle, notoriously unreliable, extremely unstable. Jeff, here's a guy that defects to the Soviet Union pre-Gorbachev. I mean, even today, who in the world defects to the Soviet Union? And he wants to become a Soviet citizen. They turn him down. What does he do? He tries to commit suicide by slashing his wrists. Just the type of person, obviously, I'm being sarcastic, that the CIA or mob would go to and rely on to commit the biggest murder in American history. One final point on this sequence here. If, just for the sake of argument, we assume that one of these groups decided to kill Kennedy, and for whatever strange, bizarre reason, they wanted to use Oswald to kill Kennedy, one of 2 things would have happened, Jeff, once Oswald left the book depository building. The least likely thing, I'll tell you first, there would have been a car waiting for him there to help him escape down to Mexico or wherever. Obviously, the conspirators would not want their hitman to be apprehended and interrogated by the authorities. That's the least likely scenario. The most likely scenario, as you know, Jeff, I think you know what I'm going to say, there would have been a car waiting for him. If the CIA or mob had been behind the assassination, a car waiting for him to drive him to his death. You know that would have happened. And yet we also know that Oswald was out on the street after he left the book depository building with $13 in his pocket, trying to flag down buses and cabs.
Yes.
And any rational person would know that if the mob or CIA had been behind this, that would not have happened. Even the parade route, Jeff, that brought the presidential motorcade right beneath Oswald's window, that wasn't even determined until November 18th, 1963, 4 days before the assassination. How can any rational person possibly believe that the CIA or mob conspired with Oswald to kill Kennedy within 4 days of the president coming to Dallas? That doesn't make any sense at all. It's just pure moonshine.
Well, and that's the rational and irrational, certainly the question there. Vincent Bugliosi is with us this morning. We continue our conversation with him next with the burning question that has always been asked on that fateful day and that fateful moment and that fateful time in Dealey Plaza right here in Dallas-Fort Worth, that little place they call the Grassy Knoll. Next with Vincent Bugliosi right here on Stimulating Talk 570 KLF. It's 8:16.
Bill Stinson, an assistant to Governor Connolly, says he talked to the governor in the hospital operating room. This is late word from Parkland. He said the governor had been shot just below the shoulder blade in the back. Stinson said he asked Connolly how it happened, and he said, "I don't know, I guess from the back, but they got the president too." The latest report from United Press International leads off this way. President Kennedy has been shot. He is perhaps fatally wounded. But we must keep repeating that there is no official word that the president is in critical condition at this time. However, he was slumped over in the back seat from the impact of the high-caliber bullets that were poured into the presidential limousine.
This is in the name of and by the authority of the state of Texas. Personally appeared before me, the undersigned authority of this affiant, who after being by me duly sworn, disposes and says your affiant has good reason to believe, and does believe that one Lee Harvey Oswald, hereinafter styled defendant, heretofore on or about the 22nd day of November, A.D. 1963, in the county of Dallas and state of Texas, did then and there, unlawfully, voluntarily, and with malice aforethought, kill John F. Kennedy by shooting him with a gun. That is attested as the affiant J.W. Fritz, against the peace and dignity of the state of Texas, sworn to and subscribed before me this 22nd day of November 1963, Henry Wade, Criminal District Attorney, Dallas County, Texas. And this instrument was then passed to me at 11:26 p.m. and filed as cause number F154 in the Justice Court Precinct 2 of Dallas County, and is attested by myself.
824 on Stimulating Talk 570 KLIF. Celebrated author Vincent Bugliosi is with us. His new book, his exhaustive book, Reclaiming History, an in-depth look at the assassination of President Kennedy, is on shelves now. I highly encourage you to go out and buy it. I have begun reading it myself. It is a remarkable book, more than 1,600 pages, and it does answer the questions that have been floating around in the ether for many years, that have been very poorly answered or poorly put forth, or frankly were the improper or the wrong questions to ask. And that always leads us back, Mr. Bugliosi, to the question of the grassy knoll in the second shooter. You say with absolute 100% certainty and being totally definitive, no second shooter, no shooter on the grassy knoll, period, didn't happen.
Well, I give many, many reasons why no shots came from the grassy knoll. I'll just give a couple of them now, of course, because we're running out of time. But number one, Jeff, if shots had come from the grassy knoll, which would be to the president's right front, why weren't there any entrance wounds to the right side of the president's body? There were only 2 bullet entrance wounds to the body. Both of them were to the back side, the upper right back and the upper right back of the head. So the conspiracy theorists cannot get around that fact that there were no entrance wounds to the right side of the president's body, only an exit wound. Also, if you're firing a Western cartridge bullet or cartridge that weighs 1/3 of an ounce and it's traveling at 2,000 feet a second, and the headshot was only about 35 yards away, there's no question that that bullet would have passed through the president's head, completely passed through his body. At an absolute minimum, it would have entered the left side of his body, and yet there's no evidence that there was any injury to the left side of the president's body. As the autopsy report showed, the left hemisphere of the president's brain was completely intact. So that just eliminates the grassy knoll. Now, there are many other reasons why the grassy knoll is eliminated. No one saw anyone with a rifle on the grassy knoll. No weapon. No expended cartridges from a weapon were found there. It did not happen. Actually, the grassy knoll was an even more difficult shot than from the 6th floor window. From the 6th floor window, if you imagine holding the barrel of a rifle, it's on a straight line down Elm Street. The limousine was only traveling 11.5 miles an hour. There's a 3.9 degree declination to Elm Street, which eliminates the necessity of elevating the muzzle as the weapon gets farther away from the window. And my firearms guy in London said that essentially the president was a stationary target. From the grassy knoll, actually it would have been a more difficult target because the limousine would have been traveling from left to right. There is one very big issue that we should talk about when we're talking about the grassy knoll, and that's the head snap to the rear. You know all about that, Jeff.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, the head snap to the rear, that would indicate that the shot came from the front, because if you look at the Zapruder film, you see the president's head snapping backwards to the rear, which would indicate a shot from the front where the grassy knoll was, not from the rear where Oswald was. And Jerry Spence in London showed that segment of the Zapruder film 5 times to the Dallas jury and said it looked like Babe Ruth had struck the president from the front. And he said, Mr. Bugliosi is trying to convince you that what you saw with your own eyes didn't even happen. And if I had not been able to have an answer to that, I think the verdict in London would have been not guilty. He would have created a reasonable doubt. But here's the answer to it, and I discuss it in great depth in the book, and I show the relevant frames of the film. At frame 312 of the Zapruder film, you have to look at the individual frames. You cannot see it by looking at the film. At frame 312, the president's head is okay. At frame 313, 1/18th of a second later, there's 18.3 frames of the Zapruder film for each second. At frame 313, you see the president being shot. You see the explosion to the head. And, Jeff, in what direction is the president's head pushed at frame 313? It's pushed slightly forward, 2.3 inches forward, not backwards, indicating a shot from the rear. So that at this all-important moment of impact, which you can't see on the film, you have to look at the individual frames, which I put up on the screen for the Dallas jury. At the all-important moment of impact, the president's head is pushed forward, not backwards, indicating a shot from the rear. And then at frames 314 to 321, we see the head snap to the rear, 8 inches, caused by a neuromuscular reaction, nerve damage caused by a bullet entering the president's brain,
yes,
caused his back muscles to tighten, which in turn caused his head to snap to the rear.
Well, Mr. Bugliosi, let me please prevail upon you to stay with us just a little bit longer. I'd be
honored.
We have not had enough time to do this with you. You are in Dallas-Fort Worth's history. You cannot, to this day. In fact, I remember a time as a young man when I was told Dallas would forever be known negatively in this country and around the world, in fact, as of President Kennedy. And this is such a vital thing to our history here. Please do stay with us because there are so many more things I want to talk to you about here. Vincent Bugliosi is with us. He has been called a master of common sense, among other things, and a curmudgeonly, refreshing voice of reason. We certainly concur with that. He stays with us as we continue to discuss his new book, Reclaiming History, an in-depth look at the assassination of President Kennedy. It's right here. And that is the so-called magic bullet. I'd like to have you talk about that because that, along with the grassy knoll, seems to be what dominates typically all of the theories and all of these various conspiracies. And I don't know, and I'm curious about this, sir. I've been told by people, I have friends that are shooters in the military and in the government, and I have been told that in the tests that they did in the aftermath, that a number of their on-staff shooters, if you will, replicated that shot. That it was absolutely in every meaningful way a makeable shot for all these people that said, well, Lee Harvey Oswald could have never made that shot. They said, no, in fact, a number of people could do it.
Yeah, you've raised a couple issues, Jeff. I'll discuss the latter one first. Number one, the conspiracy buffs have claimed that Oswald could not hit the broadside of a barn, so how did he do what he did? He hit Kennedy 1 out of 3 times, which is not great. The first shot missed. The second shot hit the upper right back. The third shot hit the head. In the military, he was a sharpshooter. He fired a .212. They've also said that no one has ever duplicated what Oswald did. So inconsistently, he can't hit the broadside of a barn, but secondly, no one ever duplicated what he did, implying that he must not have done it. But like you point out, many people have not only duplicated what he did, but beat what he did. At the time of the Warren Commission, a specialist Miller in the Army duplicated what Oswald did. In 1967, a CBS shooter did better than Oswald did. At the London trial, my firearms guy from Wisconsin did better than what Oswald did. So that's just a myth of the conspiracy theorists. Now, you started out talking about the magic bullet, and let me address myself to that very briefly. The conspiracy theorists, Jeff, what they've done in their sketches, and this magic bullet is just a complete myth fabricated by them. What they've done in their sketches, and I show it in the book, they've placed Governor Connally seated in the presidential limousine directly in front of President Kennedy, and they say that a bullet passing from the right to the left, passing on a straight line through Kennedy's body. They're not talking about the headshot now. They're talking about the shot that entered the president's upper right back. Passing on a straight line through through President Kennedy's body. After it exited his throat, to hit Connally, they say, it would have had to make a right turn in midair and then a left turn to go on to hit Connally. Well, of course, if you start out with an erroneous premise, everything that follows makes a heck of a lot of sense. The only problem is that it's wrong. And Connally was not seated directly in front of the president in the presidential limousine. You can tell from the Zapruder film, many photographs. I have a very good one in the book. Connally was seated to the president's left front in a jump seat a half a foot in. So the orientation of Connally's body vis-a-vis Kennedy's body was such that a bullet passing through Kennedy's body on a straight line had nowhere else to go, Jeff, but to hit Governor Connally. And at the trial in London, Spence asked Dr. Cyril Wecht, I don't know if you've heard of him, but he was the coroner of Allegheny County in Pittsburgh, and he's the leading pathologist for the conspiracy theorists. He asked him about the magic bullet, and he testified that bullets don't even do this in cartoons, etc., make a right-left turn. On cross-examination, I said, now, Dr. Wecht, if this bullet, which you concede passed on a straight line through Kennedy's body, soft tissue, if it did not go on to hit Connally, as you claim it did not, why did it not tear up the interior of the limousine or hit the driver? And he said, I don't know. And I said, well, then it sounds like you have a magic bullet here now. I said, it must have zigzagged to the left. He said, no, it need not have zigzagged to the left. I said, did it hop, skip, and jump over the car? He said, no. And I says, well, Dr. Weck, if it didn't hit Connolly and didn't tear up the interior and didn't hit the driver, what happened to that bullet after it exited the president's throat? And his answer was, I don't know. So who's got the magic bullet here, Jeff? What the conspiracy theorists have done, they've wrapped this magic bullet mythology around the neck of the Warren Commission for 44 years, but it is only they are the only ones who have a magic bullet, because apparently, if we believe them, after the bullet exited the front of the president's throat, it apparently vanished into thin air without a trace. They're the ones that have the magic bullet, not the Warren Commission.
Yeah, I hear the trial lawyer coming out in you there, being able to take the obvious misstatement of fact and make the absurd out of it, which could be a very effective tool, and I know that you've used it before. Let's move over here. The time right now, 8:42 on Stimulating Talk 570 KLIF. Vincent Bugliosi is with us. He is the author of the new book, Reclaiming History, the Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. It's an exhaustive book in its detail. I've begun reading it and have been mesmerized by it so far, and I really do appreciate you staying over with us here,
sir. It's my pleasure,
Jeff.
My pleasure.
And I want to ask you, let's move to Jack Ruby. You talked about the whack job that Lee Harvey Oswald was, with a clear number of mental issues, not the guy you would pick to follow through with something like this. Let's talk about Jack Ruby and the idea that somehow he was silencing on behalf of the mob or anybody else the great and final piece of evidence to this, which was Lee Harvey Oswald. Tell me how you address that.
Well, for starters, when you say that Ruby silenced Oswald for the mob, by definition, you are presupposing that Oswald killed Kennedy for the mob. If he didn't, what would there be to a silence? And there's no evidence that the mob was behind the assassination, and there's no evidence that Oswald had any connection with organized crime. As far as Ruby himself is concerned, the FBI and the Warren Commission looked into his past in great depth and concluded that there was no evidence at all that he was a member of organized crime. He was one of these guys that try to create the impression that he had mob connections. He'd drop a little hint here and there, but it was all a facade. By the way, he offered to take a polygraph test and passed it on this issue of whether he shot Oswald for the mob. But Jack Ruby would have been one of the worst hitmen in the world for the mob to go to silence Oswald. There's no question that he was very, very close to Dallas law enforcement. He was a police buff. He'd hang out at the police station, and many officers in the Dallas Police Department and Sheriff's Office were very friendly with Jack Ruby. So he was a friend of law enforcement here in Dallas. Number two, this guy was a notorious blabbermouth. If he picked up any evidence anywhere or thought he had any evidence that there was some crime being committed or had been committed, he would snitch to whom? The Dallas Police Department. So he's not the type of guy that the mob could possibly confide in. He couldn't hold a confidence in anything. He was a big blabbermouth. Also, Jack Ruby unquestionably had severe mental and emotional violent temper. He was constantly getting in fights over at his carousel club on Commerce Street, and he'd throw people down the steps. He had organic brain damage, 7 dogs, 6 of whom he called his children, the 7th his wife. Jack Revelle was the detective in charge of the Criminal Intelligence Division of the Dallas Police Department, and he testified, Jeff, before the House Select Committee on Assassination, and he says, look, I'm the detective in charge of the Criminal Investigation Division of the Dallas Police Department. I know who Jack Ruby is. I know all about him, and I can tell this committee Jack Ruby was a buffoon, and I tell this committee if Jack Ruby was a member of organized crime, then the personnel director of organized crime should be replaced. And isn't it interesting, Jeff, isn't it interesting that everyone who knew Ruby here in Dallas, and the FBI interviewed over 100 people, the knew Ruby well. They laugh at the suggestion that he was a big-time mobster and killed Oswald for the mob. They think it's a joke. And yet young kids on their internet, I'm still in the 19th century working with a yellow pad and pencil. I wrote this whole book with a yellow pad and pencil, but but these kids on the internet, they come across documents or what have you, or chatter on the websites, whatever they call that stuff, and they're convinced that Jack Ruby was just this big-time mobster that was in charge of crime here in Dallas, and that he silenced Oswald for the mob. But those who knew him, they laugh at the suggestion. Now that goes on to the next question. Then why did he kill Oswald if he was not connected with organized crime? Jack Ruby and his psychiatrist said this, loved President Kennedy. He thought he was the greatest man who ever lived. He idolized him. His sister Eva used to live in Los Angeles. She's passed away now, but I would talk to her from time to time, and she told me, these are her words, she said that when President Kennedy died, my brother Jack, quote, cried harder than when Ma and Pa died, unquote. Also, before we go on to the also, I don't think there's any question that Ruby's love for Kennedy and his hatred of Oswald contributed to what he did. I don't think there's any question about that. In fact, right after he shot Oswald, he told the officers who subdued him, well, someone had to kill that son of a blank.
Yes.
But there's another issue here. Those who knew Ruby well said that this guy was a vigilante type of guy. He always wanted to see justice done. He was an avenger, and he thought he was going to be a hero. Many people who knew Ruby said he thought he was going to be a hero. Several members of the jury that convicted him for killing Oswald concluded he thought he was going to become a hero. Bill Alexander, who prosecuted Oswald for Henry Wade. Wade was lead prosecutor, but actually Alexander handled most of the case. I've gotten to know Bill pretty well, and Bill said there's no question in his mind that he thinks that Jack Ruby thought that he was going to become a hero. We do know from his jail cell he wanted an agent. He thought there was going to be a big book and a movie about him for his
don't they always
for his heroic deed. And by the way, Jeff, he did get congratulatory telegrams from around the world from many people saying, "Great job, you're our hero." So I think in his mind, he was going to be a hero. His first lawyer said, Jack didn't even think he was going to be punished. He thought he'd get a slap on the wrist.
Oh, my goodness.
And in a due time, he'd be back at the Carousel Club greeting people from around the world who wanted to shake the hand of the man who killed the president. So it's all nonsense, but the American people has bought into it.
It's a remarkable thing, a stunning story, and these and thousands of other vignettes just like them available in the book Reclaiming History of the Assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Mr. Bugliosi, again, I congratulate you, sir, on an audacious book. I admire you for doing it, and I've been reading my entire life voraciously since I was a young boy, and I've never seen a book like this. It's remarkable, and I thank you for all the time you spent with us today.
Jeff, thanks a million for being on the show. You've lived up to your reputation as a legendary figure here in Dallas, and I'm honored that you had me on the show.